Chapter 6. Magic Stones. I was speechless as I looked at the man. I didn't know what to say. The whole situation was coming at me faster than I could process. I felt like I needed to sit down. "My mother?" I indicated at the crumpled form on the ground at Jack's feet. "Yes, well, you'll get a chance to talk to her soon," said Jack. "But first we need to have a little talk amongst the men of the family." "What did you do to her?" I blurted out, my rage now getting up to speed with my shock. I made to lunge towards him, but my father stopped me short. "Don't do it," he warned. "Exactly," smirked Jack. "Father knows a little of what I'm capable of." "You said she was poisoned," I cried. "You said I was to bring her this." I held up the bottle with the purple liquid inside. "Well, then I guess I lied," Jack went on. "It was the only way to gather us all here like this at the same time." "What have you done to her?" I asked. "She's in a deep sleep," Jack replied. "I'm the only one who can release her, which I will do once my plans are complete." "What plans?" I asked. "Take her into the cottage," Jack commanded our father. "I will get Taryn up to speed. I think you already have some idea of my plans." With a look of bitter resentment, my father walked over, tenderly picked up the unconscious form of my mother, and began to carry her to the cottage. As they got near me, I stepped forward to touch her dark hair. "Don't!" barked Jack. I pulled my hand back instantly, but in that moment, just before Jack's warning, I felt a warmth pass between my hand and her head. Then, just as suddenly, the moment was gone and my parents disappeared into the cottage. "Tell me what's going on," I demanded. Jack casually walked to a nearby stump where he sat down. "What do you know of our parents, Tarringer?" Jack began. "What do you mean?" I asked. "How much have you been told?" he pressed. How much had I been told? It was barely anything, and before a day ago it was nothing. "Not much," I conceded. I told him the little I knew from Shia and Toll. "It's true," Jack started in, "about our father being a giant, and a prince among them. And it's true that after you were born they sent you away because they were afraid I would hurt you. I would never have hurt you, really, if we had just been left alone. But they sent you away. Did they love you more? Were you their favorite? I didn't know. But I suppose they sent me on a dark trail of self-discovery. I mean, what were they so afraid of?" There was a tinge of madness to his voice as he talked that caused me to wonder how stable he really was. I began to spend a lot more time alone, and even though I was very young, I began to realize that I had some magical powers. I could ensnare and control whatever creatures I wanted to. At first it was through the setting of traps. I could conceive and create the most wonderful and powerful traps. But then I felt I could actually make them think what I wanted them to think. It was incredible. I never needed the animals I trapped, of course. It wasn't the animal itself I was after. It was the rush I felt knowing that I could control whether they lived or died. In those days, Father used to come and visit us often from Terrace. "Terrace?" I asked. "Terrace, the land of the giants," Jack replied, as if this was something everyone should know. "Terrace," I repeated, feeling the word in my mouth. "I never knew how he got there," Jack continued, "and no matter how many times I searched, I could never find out where Terrace was. I would often ask him, but he would never tell me the truth. He always played it like it was a little game between us. He would tell me to wait in the stream until midnight on a full moon, and then I would see Terrace. Or he would tell me to find the yellow berries of the quana bush, and after crushing them into paste, put them on my eyelids, and I would see Terrace. It was always something. But no matter how well I carried out his instructions, I never saw the land. By the time I was 7, I was tired of his games, and I stopped asking. Instead, I started tracking. Several times I tracked him to a mist-covered section of the forest, but then lost him in the fog. I knew I was close. I just had to be patient and keep my eyes open. I had often patrolled that area, hoping to catch a glimpse of Father's entrance and exit. I spent almost all of my time there. And then, one day, someone else came out of the mist. It was obviously another giant, an old one. It was the first person I'd ever seen besides Mother and Father, and I was instantly intrigued. He was stooped, and his ragged clothes seemed to drag the mist after them, like a bad memory that he just couldn't forget. I could tell by the look on his face that he was astonished at the land he was walking in, as though it was something that he never actually believed was a reality. I had to act fast. His ignorance of the land was my advantage. I had some traps set up in the area, and I knew that if I could capture him, I could find out what I needed to know. I let him catch a fleeting glimpse of me. He called out for me to stop, but I darted away. His curiosity got the better of him, and he began to follow. It didn't take long before the old fool had fallen into a pit that I had dug months earlier. He was scared and confused when I came back to stand at the ridge of the pit and look down at him. He cried out for mercy, but I was interested in answers, not mercy. I asked him if he came from Taris and if he knew my father, Chertik. He looked at me with widening eyes and asked if I was truly the son of Chertik. When I told him I was, he affirmed that he was from Taris and that he knew my father, but he would not tell me any more. Apparently, my father had warned him about me. I told him that unless he told me the way, he was never going to get out of that pit. 3 days later, he was dead. I returned on the 4th day to find his body already decaying. I threw a rope over the edge and climbed down to where he lay. I searched his clothing for some kind of clue as to the location of Taris, but found none. The only thing I found was a small pouch containing 5 stones, about the size and shape of beans. I pulled myself out of the pit and was just going to cover it up when Father came upon us. He looked at me and then looked into the pit. He saw the tattered garments of the dead giant. Looking back at me, he asked what had happened. I told him, plain and simple. His look of disgust was obvious, and then he saw the pouch in my hands, and his look changed from disgust to terror. He made a lunge at me, but I was too quick. I sped off into the forest, and although he was taller and faster than me, he was not as knowledgeable about the ins and outs of the forest trails, and I soon lost him. I didn't know what the change in expression on his face meant at the time, but I knew that it had something to do with the stones. Were they magic in some way? It wasn't until several months later that I was to find out. I never saw my father again after that day except once more. I never told Mother about what happened either. One day, several weeks later, she left early in the morning. When I woke, she was gone. It wasn't until a week later that she returned, and I knew that she had learned what had happened. She never said anything to me, but I could tell by her responses that things were even more strained than they were before. More and more she would head off alone early in the mornings when I was still asleep, never telling me where she went. Then one morning everything changed. I awoke alone in the house and knew that she was gone again. I wanted to know where she was going. I had guessed that she was somehow going to meet my father. For some reason that day I went back to my room, to the place where I had hid the pouch with the bean-shaped stones. I poured them into my hands and closed my fist around them. With all my heart I wished that I could see where my mother went, and all of a sudden I was there. It was like a dream. I was in the mist-covered woods where I'd lost track of Father all those times, and out of which the old giant had come. I could see her walking up ahead of me. Quietly, I followed. She walked deep into the woods until at last she approached a massive old tree. It was the biggest tree I had ever seen. Surely it was the king of all the trees in the forest. She walked around the tree several times, gently running her hand along the bark. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, and a dark space began to open up in the side of it. It grew until it was as large as a door, and in fact, as it turned out, that is exactly what it was. I could see a staircase inside the door winding up into the tree. As soon as it was completely formed, she stepped in, and the door disappeared behind her. I rushed up to the tree and felt where the door had been. It was no longer there. Now there was just a solid trunk. I pounded on the trunk as hard as I could. I mimicked her actions and circled the tree with my hand on the trunk, but nothing happened. In frustration, I decided that all I could do was wait until she came back out again. I waited for 2 long days, and on the 3rd day my patience paid off. It was midday when I heard the loud crack. I jumped behind another tree and peered around it. There was my father and mother. They stood at the entrance for a while, not willing to part ways. I could overhear them talking. "When can you come back?" she asked him. "Not until you find and retrieve the stones," he replied. "If Jack ever discovers their magic powers, there will be no stopping him. He will do greater harm than he's ever done before, and for the sake of the human race, we can't let him do that." "But he can't get to Taris without his brother," she said, "and there's no way that Taran would ever agree to join him." "That is our only hope," Father replied. "Being twins has in some ways multiplied their power, but in other ways it has divided it in 2. Just find the pouch, and then I will come and deal with Jack." At that moment I stepped out from behind the tree. Instantly Mother shoved Father back inside the tree, and the opening disappeared. I ran over to her and demanded that she open it again. She denied me. She said no one could be forced to open the portal. It had to be freely done. I was furious with her, and I swore to her that I would find a way into Terrace. I left her there by the tree and made my way back to the cottage. I had some things to figure out. I had to discover the true power of the magic stones, and I had to find out what they meant when they said that I couldn't get to Terrace without you. In time, I learned that the stones can grant wishes. Well, some wishes. I decided to make my mother take me through the portal to Terrace, but there was some strong spell that was even greater than the stones, and I couldn't force her to take me through. She did tell me one enlightening thing about the spell. It was set up so that the only way I could get through the portal was with my brother and my father, and all of us had to do it willingly. So there you have it. I needed you and Father here so we could together go through the portal. By this time my father had come back out of the house. So, you somehow put the thought in our minds that Taryn had arrived in the threshold, retrieved the stones, and wanted to meet us here, he said accusingly. Yes, and then I lured Taryn into the threshold, boasted Jack. And now everything has come together perfectly. What makes you think that we are going to go willingly through the portal, I asked. Come on, Taryn, Jack cooed. You don't really want your mother to stay the way she is for the rest of her life, do you? She might as well be dead. You go through the portal with me, and I wake her up. It's simple. But what are you hoping to do once you get there, I pressed. That's the other part of my plan, Jack smiled. But you don't get a preview of that. You get to experience it firsthand, just like everyone else. Now, you know all that you need to know. Shall we proceed to the portal? Father and I looked at each other. Together we stood a chance of overpowering Jack, but with the hold he had on Mother we couldn't risk it. So after Jack indicated that Father should lead the way, and with me in the middle, we headed for the portal to the land of the giants.